Bruce Dern, you co-starred in the most recent season of Goliath on Amazon. I'd love to know, a lot of it's about a courtroom drama. And then the seventh episode,
about what kind of
courtroom drama,
Oh, right.
with Billy Bob Thornton as a major legal figure. I would love to know, from your perspective, you've had all kind of roles in your career. When you're doing a big courtroom scene like you did in the seventh episode, the next to last episode, are there any tricks to that? Is it really fun for an actor to do?
Well, Billy Bob called me on the telephone maybe 2 years ago right now. And he said, would you do a television series? I said, well, I'd done two. I did one called Stony Brook in 1961 where Jack Lord was the star. The co-stars were me and Warren Oates. And then I did Big Love, which was about Mormons. And I said, what's the series about? And he said, well, I know Billy Bob well because he and Laura were together for about 5 years. And they met the night that he had his Sling Blade stuff at the Oscars. And Laura was there for a movie called Rambling Rose. And they were both the same year. And so he said to me, well, think Rear Window. And I said, I got it. In other words, it's about, I know who you are, and I think you know who I am. And that's what I got from Raymond Burr, because Raymond Burr looks across at Miss Kelly and the other, and while he's cutting up his wife in the suitcase. And he knows they've seen him doing that. So therefore,
It's chilling when you see his eyes come across that.
Yeah. And so that was great. That's Billy and I have really, he's a wonderful guy, and I go back a ways with him, but he, and it was interesting. I didn't have to be in the first 3 years, and J.K. played my brother, and so I said, fine. And it took a while for the series to lay my character out in more full body, so you found out about what he was and everything. And in the courtroom, I'd never really done a scene in a courtroom. I'd been a judge in a courtroom for Billy Bob in a movie called All the Pretty Horses, and which is a movie a lot of people never found, but it's a very good movie. And Cormac McCarthy, I mean, come on. And so I've always felt that acting has a lot, I mean, movies are really about photographing in an interesting way conversations. And I like that style in what they were doing. I didn't really see the first 3 years of it, but I liked where they were headed. And we had all the scripts before the season began. I mean, they were all written. They weren't writing right behind us, you know. Larry Trilling, who was a writer and a producer. And they also, well, they had a staff of writers, but also directed all but one episode. And so Billy said to me, look, you're here because you're you. And you're extremely unpredictable. And it's not planned out. And you have your Dernsies, which are these little things I throw in all the time, from time to time. And Larry came to me one day and he said, I know we're kind of getting toward you and everything when we get in the courtroom, but I want to build up the relationship between J.K. and you that is just really talked about. We don't know what went on when you designed the drug, so to speak, and he wanted to sell it. You know, I mean, and then I divorced myself from the product because it's addictive. And he didn't want to do that. So that's essentially, I guess you could say, we're kind of a TV pharma. You know what I mean? And I like the whole setup of it. I think the thing that surprised me more than anything was how good and strong the women characters were in the series. I like that. And they were all very good. And I liked where it was headed. And when we got to episode 7, you know, I never really sat down and, well, we were on it over a year because of the pandemic, but it wasn't supposed to be a year. And JK and I never sat down and really had a conversation or a talk, you know. So I do know that in my career, I have seen 4 performances that I don't think I could have ever given. And JK's performance in Whiplash is one. It's the 4th. The other 3 are, oddly enough, a weird group of people. It's the Australian actor from Shine.
Oh, Jeffrey Rush.
Jeffrey Rush, his performance. It's hard to say, but Murray Abraham and Amadeus got my attention. And then Roy Scheider and all that jazz. Because I used to have a lunch twice a year with 3 guys, me, George Carlin, and Bob Fosse. And we were all kind of the same person in our own thing. Fosse in the theater and dancing and everything like that. And George Carlin, it was just flat out funny. I mean, he was just funny.
I could see where the 2 of you would have hit it off.
And then me was the same thing. And oddly enough, I got to know him through Anne Reinking, who he was married to for a long time, and who was one of his typical Fosse, you know, 6'11" or whatever, you know. And,
were you able to tell JK that how much you loved Whiplash?
Yeah, I did. I told him that at the very beginning. I said, how the director, I've got the feeling he puts you in an arena and you went further than what they wrote. And I admire that. He said, well, I guess so, because that's what you've been doing for 50 years. And I said, well, I've been very lucky in the directors I've gotten to work with. And I've always felt that I worked for 6 what I'd call genius directors. Not in order of importance, but just they would be Mr. Kazan, who I started out under contract to, Mr. Hitchcock, Douglas Trumbull. Everybody always says, well, why include him? Well, it's not just silent running. The guy just was his first or second year in college where he won the Academy Award for 2001. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't more than 23 or 24 years old. And so him, and then Francis Coppola, Quentin Tarantino, and Alexander Payne. And so I was very lucky, because when I began, I was in Philadelphia. I went to the University of Pennsylvania 2 years, and mainly just ran at the school. I mean, the only course I liked was, my dad had gone there and was on the board of trustees and everything, and I was a well-known runner, half mile, 800 meters. And so I went there basically to run. My problem is the freshman year when I was there in 1954 and early 55, freshmen were not allowed to compete in varsity sports. That came in the 60s. So now freshmen can, you know, I mean, look at all the basketball guys go for 1 year and they're gone. And so I auditioned, and the night that I auditioned was the night for final auditions. So Mr. Strasberg, Cheryl Crawford, and Mr. Kazan were all there. when my 5-minute scene, I was the last scene I did a little scene from Waiting for Godot conversation. And so I said, I finished, and Gadge came up to me with Lee right next to him, and he said, welcome to the Actors Studio. I said, you're kidding, I never did a first audition or anything. He said, no, we're excited to have you. And you know why? I said, why? I don't have a clue of what I'm doing yet. That's why you're here, because you have no bad habits. So we want you to do something even Stanislavski didn't do with his students. We want you to be kind of our Frankenstein. The first year you're here, every scene you work on, you will have no responsibility to dialogue. So I was a silent partner for 9 months in maybe 13 scenes. They wanted me to work as often as I could. And so I had to do a lot of Strindberg plays and stuff where there's always one person who's talking and it wasn't me. And all the other people were heading off to Hollywood and every place else. But since I was under contract to Mr. Kazan, along with, there were 5. There was Rip Torn, Pat Hingle, Jolene Page, myself, and Lee Remick. And I was really the baby of it. But Lee was probably more of a baby than me because a year and a half earlier, she had done a movie called Face in the Crowd for Kazan. And she was the drum majorette from that high school that they shot at in Arkansas. And so he put her in the movie and then put her under contract. And that's how her career got going. And so when I got to the courtroom, everybody was kind of familiar with who I was, what Dernsies were, and the fact is that they wanted me to surprise them. And so there's additions now and then, but what Dernsies are is there are things that I put in that aren't written on the page. And when we were doing The Hateful Eight, for example, one of my 2 eight combatants raised their hand one day and said, why is he allowed to say that? And Quinn stopped, cupped his hands, and there were about 80 people, and we were 10,000 feet in Telluride, or we're actually above the ski lifts in Telluride. And he said, I'm only going to say this once. That's why he's here. Because Mr. Kazan would tell you, Mr. Hitchcock would tell you, Alexander Payne, and I'll tell you, no one can write the shit that comes out of his mouth. And he isn't sure really what it's going to be. So Jack Nicholson in 1971 named something I did there and called it a Dernsie. So that's why it's been a Dernsie. And I was in a movie called Drive, he said, which Jack directed and a guy named Jeremy Larner wrote. And in the courtroom, I said everything that was written. But there are some things weren't written, like when I sit down and the lawyer for me, the girl lawyer for me, she starts saying something, and J.K.'s lawyer interrupts her. And I turn to the judge, this isn't in the script, and I says, why is she allowed to do that? She's my lawyer, she's talking to me, he's interrupting her. And, everybody realized what could happen. And it worked. It all works. But that's what Dernsies are. They're things you interject that the writer's not going to do because he's writing about, 20 other people every show, every day. And he didn't know where he wanted that to go. But when I say the directors that I've worked for that are geniuses, what makes them geniuses is their approachability on a set to any single member of the crew at any time who is encouraged to come to them and say, what is my exact job in this shot? And they'll tell you, because they're all professors and they're all approachable because they love movies, they love cinema. And so Larry got very familiar with that, and Billy already knew that. And so I felt relaxed and at ease to defend myself. And
it comes off really well. I mean, I gotta say, well, I think TV of all the mediums, courtroom scenes, going all the way back to Perry Mason, all the way up to recent ones, it's just so compelling.
Oh, I mean, I think of Lee Remick, and her first big movie was Anatomy of a Murder, and that was Judge Welch played Judge Welch.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just, but so I've always liked that. And then Billy and I have a history, and that was the first. We had several little, short 2-page scenes throughout between he and I throughout the show, where we were talking to each other, and it comes across, I hope it does, in the show that I know something that he knows other people shouldn't know, and vice versa.
Right.
And the courtroom was a chance for all that, and that's why I felt. I think the thing about all those directors that I just mentioned, and many others, I mean, I leave out Hal Ashby, I leave out John Frankenheimer, I leave out Sidney Pollack, Mark Rydell, famous Jack Clayton for Gatsby. And I leave them out because they weren't approachable all day long on a set. And these people were. And they encouraged me, knowing that I started out from here, because that's all what they were teaching me was how to go into Bruce Dern and how does he behave in certain circumstances. And with an obligation to dialogue, I wouldn't have been able to build what I built from that. So I'm taking from my life and other people's lives. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I've never said this to anyone. But did you see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So when Brad Pitt comes in to wake me up, he says, wake up, George, wake up. And he says 3 or 4 things. He finally rustles me awake. And I wake up. And I said, what's going on? Brad laughed. And Quentin said, what are you doing? And Brad said, but that's not in the script. And he said, Brad, that's why he's here. I can't write that. I don't know what beat by beat's gonna be. I'm not what you would call a method writer. I write what really happens. So, and we did the scene again, and Brad, I never met Brad till that day. And I never met Leo except once until that day, and that was through his dad, who was kind of a, Leonardo DiCaprio's dad. Okay, he's kind of a hippie, old turn guy, and animal active, right, and everything, and kind of the senior citizen of Silver Lake, if you will.
Right.
And so I felt that, anyway, so then we go through the stuff that Quentin wrote about. I don't know who the fuck you, I'm allowed to say that. I don't know who the fuck you are or anything like that. And he says, well, I just wanted to make sure that, they're not taking advantage of you and everything like that. And I finally get pulled up, so I'm almost as close as I am to the camera here, and with Brad. And I said, I don't know who you are. And Quentin wrote that. The Guernsey starts with, but you did something for me today that really touched me. You came to see me. And that is really special. Well, that's not in the script. And Brad was not stunned and went with it and everything like that. And otherwise, the rest of the scene is Quentin and everything, except at the very end, when she says, he says, well, I hope Squeaky's not taking care of you. He said, you know, the red-haired girl that I mean, I said, Quentin wrote that. How the fuck would I know what color hair she is? I'm blind, you know. And he said, well, does she love? I said, besides, Squeaky loves me. So suck on that. And then I go back. Now those are Guernseys. And that's an example of what I felt I could do in the courtroom scene. Because what all those directors do, and my favorite directors, they really could direct opera. And they give you a wide enough theater to explore as long as you're disciplined enough to stay in the context of the material and not think it's your right to do whatever you want. And that's the big thing I got from Goliath. And in the courtroom scene, I like that. And at the very end of the courtroom scene, when they're dragging me out of the courtroom, you know, we shot two versions. One was the one you see, and the other one was one with Guernseys. And the Guernseys were, as I go by, Billy Bob comes walking up to the front, and I go right by him. And I said to him, Lawyer McBride, you remember way back when we were in this courtroom and you told me it was the best room in America because it's all about fairness? And yet today, on the most crucial day of my life, what did you do for me? You just stood by. And it was one version or the other. So they showed the one that they wanted, but that's pretty good stuff. And that's what I'm talking about. And when I say to you about Brad, where does that come from with Brad that you touched me today? I look at things like, who allows you to be in that situation in the first place? Well, here's one of the 2 or 3 biggest movie stars in the world allowed me to play that role in a scene with him. So that's what touched me. So that's where all that comes from.
Well, listen, Bruce, this performance I really loved on Goliath, and best of luck on the Emmys. You've been at the Emmys before. Maybe this will be the trick for you.
I got nominated, I think, one time for supporting actor in Big Love.
Big Love, yeah.
But otherwise, I just haven't done that much television.
Right. You may have a whole new career path now.
Well, you know, people forget that Mr. Hitchcock directed every one of his half-hour episodes.
Yeah.
And then that's how I got to know him. And he put me in Marnie. Well, it was 1963. And so then when I got to Family Plot, that was all like that. But I appreciate your knowledge and everything of what I've done. That really is nice.
Well, thank you so much.